If you're not familiar with United Kingdom, Derby's in the middle of the country, amongst the Peak District, about an hour and a half away from Birmingham, which is the closest really big city there. So my background is I'm a biologist, but I currently work in a central part of the university, and my primary remits are both pedagogic research, but also working with what we call colleges, but those of you from United States, American, Canada may call faculty, in working on their institutional level strategy, faculty level strategy, and all the way down to supporting individual members of staff. And what I want to talk to you about today is, in a way, a very, very simple little game that we developed to help foster those conversations around assessment. So I'm going to present the problem, then talk you through the game and some of the benefits I've seen from using it. The game is completely publicly available, and I'll show you the link at the end. Okay, so that's the plan for today's session. Okay, so what's the context? So about 6 years ago, our institution went through a university-wide transition of our new curriculum model. What that meant is that every single program in the university had to effectively restructure itself and realign itself to the central learning, teaching and assessment frameworks. I'm sure you can all imagine how much work that was, and the sheer number of programs that we had to pull through this process. Obviously, the process was complex, but one thing that particularly became apparent very quickly was the very limited perspectives that faculty colleagues had on assessment. And when I say that, I mean particularly assessment modes, the ways that we can assess students. After hearing the opening parallels and the wonderful keynote, I don't need to convince anybody of what assessment is and move beyond the very narrow view that it's just a tool to grade students' competence. But I'm sure you work with colleagues that do have those more restrictive views on what assessment is. That being said, I really like this quote here from Brown from 1997, which says, assessments define what students regard as important, how they spend their time and how they come to see themselves as students and then as graduates. If you want to change student learning, then you need to change the method of assessment. So this game came from a staff development session where we used effectively assessment as a way to open the door to get colleagues to think more broadly about their assessment, their curriculum, and all the support structures that go around it. So as I show you the game, starts next slide, you're thinking this is really, really simple and basic. In a way, that was the point. Many colleagues were resistant to change, as I'm sure they are across the world, and this game was meant to be a light-hearted, semi-thought-provoking approach to get them to think about different ways of doing things. Okay, so without further ado, so the motivation for the game really were these 6 things. There are 6 things I wanted to pull out of the game's narrative, and if I get time at the end, I'll say how the game was wrapped into a more formal staff development session. We wanted assessment to offer, parity across the student body, and that's in terms of the actual individual assessments themselves, but also the range of assessment modes that are used across the university. To use, a cheap example, and I have institutional data to support this, almost all students perform worse on closed book examinations than they do on other forms of assessment. There are a small group that statistically manage improving that form of assessment. We wanted to make sure that the assessment was constructively aligned to the learning outcomes and the teaching within the curriculum. Of course, more broadly, we want the assessment to do more than grade competence and develop skills, particularly those transferable skills which are highly sought after in the sector. We wanted to move away from outcome-based assessment and make assessments part of the learning process. We wanted to offer flexibility, always a difficult one, but we wanted the assessments to offer students some element of choice. I mean, this could be low-level choice all the way down to, you're doing an essay and you can choose your title, all the way up to choosing assessment mode itself. We've got some good models of that, which I could share if time allows. But most importantly, for me, is, you know, make students enjoy assessment. Is that possible, you say? Well, I think it is. You know, if you approach it right and you do all those other things I've said, you know, create assessment that actually motivate students want to do it because they enjoy the experience. And likewise, you know, faculty staff who enjoy incorporating those assessments into their delivery and enjoy grading them and marking, enjoying seeing what students can produce. So the way I did this was a game. So the game was delivered face to face. It was happened before the COVID pandemic, though I have adapted it to use it online since that date. The game can take anywhere from 20 to 40 minutes, depending on time. As I got more used to how the game panned out, I used it as use it for shorter periods of time. And in fact, I began to use it in two ways. One is either effectively an icebreaker for those more in-depth discussions about their curriculum, or two, when I had a program team which were further along in their thinking processes, I used the game for longer to really get them to challenge different aspects of their practice. So this is how the game works. So I'll go to things. So to start off with, I draw out and deal to every player 3 modes of assessment. So I've just dealt out 3 cards to you here, and just in case you can't read on the very small slides, they say abstract, scrapbook, and role play. And beneath each assessment mode type, there's a small piece of text. And once again, just in case you can't see on the slide, I read those out. It says, for abstract, it says a short summary of an article. For scrapbook, it says a 1-page collection of images, texts, and other media with reflective commentary. And for role play, it says a presentation or preparation on a specific role or viewpoint. So assessment mode and a very, very short description of what they are. So each player's dealt 3. And in my deck of cards, of course, you can't read these. There's about 65 different modes of assessment within the pack. Where did these modes come from? You know, some from the collective brain bank at the university, but most from searching online for different assessment modes that people use. Many of these assessment modes will be common to the kinds of people who attend these kind of events, but I'm sure you can resonate with me that in the collective faculty, many of these are brand new ideas to those types of people. You know, most programs at my institution used a very narrow range of assessment modes. You know, definitely less than 10, and sometimes as few as 5 or 6 assessment modes were most common. And it was great to see in the opening keynote some assessment modes that I'd never heard of before, which could be incorporated into here. So there's 65 different assessment modes, and what people were asked to do after they've been dealt their 3, you know, in secret, so we've got a bit of game-based learning, gamification going here, is order their assessment modes from most likely to be used on their program to least likely. So they'd end up something like this. So I've ordered them, and you can perhaps think about those yourself. So at the top, we've got abstract. This is the one that this particular player feels is most likely to be used on their program. Second, we have role play, and scrapbook, no, very unlikely. So once they've ordered those, the next thing I do is I make them remove the top card from the their list out of the game. So I'm not here to talk about assessment modes that are already familiar with. I'm here to challenge their thinking and think about assessment modes that they maybe not have heard of before. So the most common one is removed. So now they're left with only role play and scrapbook. So the next thing I do is draw 1 card from my assessment type file. So here I've drawn the card employability skills, as you can see, and there's 6 different assessment type cards. And what these are designed to represent is common things or ideas that you may like to evaluate within a course or a module. So we've got employability skills in, research skills in, critical skills in, current theories in, very generic kind of ideas. Really, they're there to give some context to the next part of the activity. And the next part of activity, as you can see from the arrows, is encourage your players to think, well, in the context of my program, let's just say we've got a group of biology academics in the room. How could I use a scrapbook to assess employability skills? In biology, how could I use role play to assess employability skills? So it's thinking about something which is quite common to them. Every program has got an employability based component to it, and thinking about how for a different assessment mode could I assess that. So that's a very short private activity, but where this game works particularly well is when, as the groups of players on tables come together, show all their cards and share their collective experiences. So now we've got 3 players who have all turned over the 2 cards that they least wanted to keep from their piles. So we've got a magazine article and a lesson plan. We've got a site report and a news article. And now effectively it's a collective discussion around how you can evaluate employability skills using the modes that are around the table. Now, very quickly, what happens is 1 or 2 of the modes that have been turned over are not deemed appropriate and removed, and they're left with a few. And I'm always amazed, given what is a very simple challenge, can you link these 2 things together? The most reticent of people are very fixed on their modes, try hard to effectively win and join up the 2 ideas together. And as I said, the purpose is really just to get them thinking about different ways they can evaluate their various components of their programs. Just to show you the assessment modes. So these are the 6 that I use frequently: the theory of, practical techniques in, trends, employability skills, placement in, and scholarly activity in. The first version of the game didn't have these red cards, just had the blue cards, but I found that actually this anchor point was really important for narrowing down discussions to a thing. Though the assessment modes could be used in other places, in other contexts within their programs, this initial anchor was really important, particularly for those reticent players that I previously mentioned. So, that's the absolute basis of the game. It's incredibly simple. Normally play 1 or maybe 2 rounds with players before people want to look through the deck of cards and see what other things are in there. The game comes with a facilitator's guide and a player's guide. Here's just an image of those, though you can get all of those online from on the website. So it can be played by players on their own. The facilitator guide includes some instructions on how the game should be run in order to maximize its impact. So I've run this game lots of times now. I want to share some tips on how it's used. I haven't formally evaluated it. It's an internal staff development tool. First step is consider the audience. So with 65 assessment modes, maybe that doesn't sound a lot to some, but it's quite a large number. It could be quite overwhelming. I often consider the audience coming to me in terms of their prior knowledge, often by just looking at the assessment modes that are already on their programs. And I sometimes carefully remove those program types from the deck of cards. I don't want them just repeating the existing ideas that they have, so that I just remove those. If the key part of the game after they've had this initial discussion is how do you scaffold it into something more meaningful and think about their overall curriculum design. And I think the assessment details is a good way of doing this, which is the short yellow line of text beneath the assessment type. Because if you have something like closed book exam, that could be online or face to face. That closed book exam could include case studies or problem-based learning questions. They could take a reference list in with them beforehand, etc., etc. So there's lots of nuances in the way that every assessment mode can be applied, and that's often the next step to getting them thinking carefully about what do they want the assessment to deliver, and some of the bigger questions that are raised in the opening keynote. Another good thing to get them to think again is ask them about levelness. So by levelness, I mean, is this undergraduate, postgraduate? If it's undergraduate, which, year of study are we thinking of? And does that get them to think in any way different about the design that they come up from the assessment mode for that particular assessment type that I've generated? The pool of cards includes blank cards and encourage people to come up with their other assessment modes. So sometimes people do this, scribble down ideas on cards and add them to the deck as they play. As I said, this is only step one of a curriculum development tool. But when I first proposed this idea, the time that we get colleagues in the room to undertake face-to-face staff development was very limited. Often at best half a day. And the question is, can we afford to spend, half an hour or 40 minutes playing effectively a game for which is focused on a very narrow part of the curriculum? And I think all of those who raised those questions have now reflected and said the answer is yes. It's absolutely worth it. It opens up their mind in a different way to thinking about the subsequent discussions about how the curriculum is developed and framing the different skills they want to generate through that. So that's the game. This is the link to the game. I'll just put the link in the chat here. It's been up on the web quite a while, and as I heard the opening keynote, I realized there's a couple of problems with the link, which I'm going to look to remedy tomorrow. First, they're uploaded in PDF format, which I know is not very accessible, so I'm going to see if I can get Word versions up there instead, with a Creative Commons license, so people can change the colors to suit accessibility needs. So but here's the PDF link anyway. So I know that was quite a short presentation. Oh, well done. Oh, actually, it's a bit longer than I thought it was, but happy to take any questions anyone may have about the talk. Have I ever had students play the game? Actually, I have once, actually, but it wasn't part of a formal staff development activity. It was part of, I was basically commissioned by faculty to engage some students in a co-creation exercise. We played assessment the game as part of that. I'd say initially they had much narrower pool of ideas than faculty colleagues, but they quickly embraced the new ideas that are coming up. I mean, they didn't realize things like comics or games or blogs could be used as assessment modes. It's almost like they're preconditioned by their prior educational experiences. Something I'd like to do more of. How long does the game take? The quickest I've played it is about 20 minutes, one quick round with a small group of people. So yeah, but you can spend like all these kind of games. When people get talking, you can go on as long as you like. Could you speak a little bit more about the instructors and getting their participation? Yeah, this is so my main area of research is game-based learning, and this is a key concept. And really, the game, like all games like this, are scaffolded from individual to group. So, if you've got someone who's reticent, in the group-based scenario, that does lead to a little bit of social uncomfortableness, which normally forces people to at least engage on a vague participatory level, in some sense. But even if they don't do that, at the very least, they are listening to the conversation that other players happen. I find out the players are the truly reticent people who don't engage at all are very rare over the length of the game. It's almost like people can't help themselves but to be engaged. Yeah, so I mean, the next step of this process, what comes after the game is very different. So in the institutional review that I mentioned, all programs are done effectively a gap analysis or a needs assessment prior. So we had a series of activities or workshops, depending on what they are. But this assessment game was really just kind of that opening the book, you know, as part of that. And it was built into a formal validation and review structure and all those kind of aspects that you'd expect in a university. Yeah, that's a very good question. So I've only ever used this game in my own institution. You know, obviously our staff base do have different cultural perspectives. In fact, I mean, I don't want to make any generalizations when I've not properly evaluated this here, but actually I find the different cultural perspective enhance the game, because experiences of assessment in other cultures and countries, which perhaps colleagues have thought weren't appropriate in the UK higher education system, when prompted by a card, have come to the fore. And actually there's a richness of their own experiences which they're able to express for the first time because they felt constrained by the existing assessment modes that were already on the program. But you know, as I said, I've only used it in my own institution on academics who work in the UK system at this moment. Well, I'd like to thank everyone for their participation. I know we've got a few minutes left, the 6-minute countdown clock, but that may give everyone a chance to grab a quick refreshment break before the next keynote. So thank you very much.
Hi, Ian. Thank you.
Hi, Alan. Thanks.
I have another question. I asked about the culture and countries. What about people who are more introspective or more introverted and extroverted? People that can put themselves out there to be able to express how they are feeling and playing a game like this, versus people who won't want to talk as much. Do you see that? Do you see big differences? More extroverted people will buy into playing this game more than introverted people?
I can't recall it happening in this game, but it happens to me a lot when I use these kind of games. And my classic strategy for that is, I mean, this game starts as a solo player sorting out the cards. If you can see that that's happening, you very quickly pair people up. So you do it as a 2 to start off with. There's a great comfort in having somebody who's got the same cards in front of you, rather than thinking, oh my goodness, what do I do with comics? So if you see that happening, just you can pair people up. I mean, another thing I do is you can have a safety assessment type, like an essay or an exam, and you can swap out one of the cards and give them an easier starting point rather than 2 radical forms of assessment. So just all those kind of little games master techniques that you use.
Great. I love simulation gaming. I think that's the key. It's been around for a long time, but you came up with a good idea. So thank you very much.
Okay, thanks a lot. Bye.